Welcome to the IUN Community Garden Session, Gardening Without Pesticides. My name is Amanda, and I am the Assistant Director of the Center for Urban and Regional Excellence. Leslie Kaiser will also be helping to moderate, and she is the Garden Coordinator. The presenter for today's session is Dolly Foster. Dolly Foster is landscape horticulturist for the Oak Lawn Park District. She has been a master gardener for 20 years, an Indiana accredited horticulturalist for 18 years, and a certified arborist since 2008. For the past 20 years, Dolly has been presenting lectures on many gardening topics. She spent 4 years as an adjunct faculty member of the Joliet Junior College Agriculture Horticulture Department. She has been winter sowing for 6 years, using it as a method to reliably start native plants. And today we'll be speaking to us about gardening without pesticides. Dolly, we're very glad to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about being here. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending. I'm going to talk to you about gardening without pesticides today. And this isn't technically going to be just what we call organic gardening. This is going to be how do we create an environment in our gardens where we don't need any chemicals. So organic gardening is a very technical definition. If you were to start a farm and you wanted to designate it as organic, you have to go through a lot of government hoops and a lot of money to actually be registered as an organic garden or an organic farm. So what we're talking about today is more about making ecosystem in our own yard, whether it be a flower garden or a vegetable garden, in such a way that we attract beneficial insects and we repel the insects that we don't want. So that's mostly what it's all about. We want to attract those good predator insects and we want to repel the insects that we don't want. Butterflies are a really important pollinator for vegetable, well, not so much vegetables, but flowers. And then there are native bees and honeybees that are really integral in pollinating vegetable gardens. And so we want to make sure that we use pesticides because of that, those two things. We don't want to hurt bees and butterflies, and we don't want to put pesticides on our food plants. And in the end, if you avoid chemicals as much as possible, you are going to save money and your health will be better. So those are sort of all the goals of why we do this. So the things that you are going to learn how to do is the organic approach to gardening. So this is going to mimic nature. It's going to recycle nutrients and waste in your garden, preserve and enhance your soil biology, which is quite possibly the most important thing. You want to conserve your soil in general. You don't want your soil to erode away. And you want to conserve your soil moisture in your garden because that helps keep everything pretty healthy. And then you're going to eliminate the need for toxic chemicals, and you're going to generally promote human and ecological health, which sounds like I repeated a lot of stuff, but they're all a little bit nuanced. So they're all a little bit different. So we're going to go over most of these things today. So the necessities for gardening organically or ecologically in your own home garden or the community garden. I run a community garden where I work. Leslie is the garden coordinator here at IUN, and we are constantly trying to monitor healthy soil and making sure we have healthy soil by adding nutrients to the soil every year. And then that way we can have healthy plants. So healthy soil equals healthy plants. We need to provide plants what they need and want, which is nutrients and minerals in the soil. And we want to protect our plants, whether they be flowers or vegetables, from weeds and other pests and diseases. And then always remember that it's important to remove sick or diseased plants in a garden. And even in a vegetable or even in a flower garden, that's really important. It's very important in vegetable gardening. I'm sure most of you who have vegetable garden in the past know that once late blight hits your tomatoes, you better harvest what you can and get rid of those plants so that you can decrease the amount of blight for next year. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. So soil is the most important component, and you want to feed the soil. We want healthy, well-drained soil to produce vigorous plants, nourish the soil. We can't grow really good vegetables and really beautiful flowers in hard clay, wet clay. There's a few plants that are adaptable to that kind of environment, but it's not the optimal growing conditions. If we encourage our plants to be healthy, vigorous plants, they can fight off pests on their own. The plants have a lot of defense mechanisms that we don't even see, and they are able to fight off some pests. And the best soil amendment is going to be organic matter. This is the one amendment that can transform most soils. So it's going to increase aeration in clay soils. And aeration means that we are making that soil a little lighter, a little fluffier, a little well-drained, more well-drained. And then it's going to increase moisture retention in light sandy soils. So one amendment is going to improve, I'm not going to say solve, but I'm going to say improve our two biggest problems in gardening, which is clay soil, and in this area around the lake, light sandy soils, which are really hard to hold on to nutrients. They have a hard time with that. Putting organic matter into your garden is going to add live soil organisms, and these soil organisms are going to be able to do their thing. So you want to make sure that your compost is alive when you put it in. So the organic matter that I'm specifically talking about is compost. This compost can be in the form of homemade compost. It can be in the form of some sort of natural manure, such as composted horse manure, composted cow manure. There is a company on the market that sells duck manure, which is really good. There's chicken manure. There's all different kinds of manure that you can use in your vegetable and flower garden to enhance it. Homemade compost is probably the easiest to do, but sometimes it takes a long time if you're not attending it well. And we can talk a little bit more about that in the questions and answer period at the end. The most important thing about compost is that it brings in soil microbe benefits. And by that, I mean, it's going to decay things into organic matter that can be used as nutrients for your plants. It is going to help create an environment under the soil where beneficial fungi and bacteria are going to attach to the roots of your plants and help your plants take up more nutrients and more water. It makes them bigger, more robust, and healthier. It helps create that ecosystem in your soil, so you will have the cycle of life happening in your soil. The better, more high quality compost that you put in your garden, the more microbes you're going to have, and then they will be able to reproduce on their own after that, especially if you leave a little bit of debris on the top of the soil. You don't want to leave a lot of debris, but some, because they like to eat those decaying bits of plants. It creates a healthy environment so that your plant is going to be able to fight off those pests and diseases. And then this composting is a great way to use up kitchen scraps and garden waste. You can use any kind of food waste except for meat and dairy in a compost bin. You can use other things like you want browns and greens in compost, so you can use dry leaves and small twigs that are chopped up. And you can use grass clippings as long as they've not been treated with a pesticide. As long as they've been fertilized 4 weeks in advance, that grass can be used in composting. You don't want to do it right away after it's been fertilized, though. You want to wait a few weeks. So this is a good way to reuse elements on your own property to be able to make something that is going to help your soil. I'm not going to call compost fertilizer, because compost is not fertilizer. What compost is a soil conditioner in the way that it adds soil microbes to the soil, and these are going to improve your soil, how fluffy it is. It's going to hold moisture, whichever that soil needs, and the microbes are going to do a whole host of benefits for your plants. Watering wisely is very important for any garden, whether it be vegetable or flower. If you can put in a simple drip irrigation system, especially with your vegetable garden, that's really important. With flower gardening, if you concentrate on native plants, then to attract your pollinators, then you really won't need to water a whole lot after the first 2 years. You need to let those plants get established. And then they're extremely low maintenance. So natives are the way to go for water conservation in the garden. But drip irrigation is great for vegetable gardening. And if you can manage it, if you can figure out how to do it and you can manage it, then it's the best way to do it, because the water is delivered directly to the roots of the plants and the leaves do not get wet, as in with overhead watering. And for vegetable gardens, it's really important to keep foliage dry as possible, because that is where a lot of diseases will manifest. They will develop and enter the plant through the foliage. So we want to try and keep the foliage pretty dry, and watering underneath is the best thing to do. And timing is really important. Watering in the morning is the best time of the day to water. Watering your plants after they've already wilted in the middle of the day is going to take twice as much water in order to perk those plants up again. So as long as you're not watering the foliage, you can do a little bit of watering in the evening, early evening. But you don't want those plants to go into the night with water on the foliage, because again, water on the foliage is the way that a lot of plant diseases enter the plant. So let's talk about all those alternatives to pesticides. And mostly what I'm going to be talking about is plants. But the first thing I want to introduce to you is integrated pest management. That's IPM. IPM is a set of guidelines and regulations that were set out from the Department of Agriculture, the US Department of Agriculture, back in the late 70s. And there is a lot of steps to integrated pest management, but the goal is to control insects, weeds, and plant diseases with an environmental and economical practice that is more healthy for the earth. So we sometimes I think that farmers and the U.S. Department of Agriculture get a little bit of a bad rap. I'm not going to get on my soapbox for very long, but I think when I was growing up, the impression of farming was, they use a lot of pesticides and they use too much and they shouldn't use so many herbicides. And it still is like that. They kind of get that bad rap. But the truth is that they're going to use as little as possible, so they're not wasting any money and they're not wasting any of the product. And so they're not hurting the environment. Farmers are very into trying to keep the environment around their farm healthy, because that just enhances how their crops yield. So that's kind of where this introduction to IPM came from, was that in the 50s and the 60s, people were fertilizing using herbicides and pesticides with abandon, and they wanted to, the government wanted to try and find a way that they could teach farmers a better way of doing things, where you minimize those pest populations rather than concentrating on eradication, because you're never going to eradicate a pest completely. You just aren't, because the farmer or the garden next to you might not be using any chemicals, and they can't eradicate the pest either, or they are using chemicals and the pest just moves to your garden where you are not using chemicals. So this approach is going to help you observe your garden closer and learn how to manage those pests. So the original IPM guidelines, there's about 70 guidelines in it, and the agriculture universities have boiled them down to 5 steps for gardeners to use, vegetable and flower gardeners. So let's go over some of those. The most important thing that you need to know is that IPM is not organic gardening. It does not reject the use of traditional pesticides as a last. You only use pesticides as a last resort. If you all of your other methods cannot get rid of it. The backbone is to target the pest vulnerabilities, and that's what I'm going to teach you about today. That's the main idea of what today is, teaching you about the pest's vulnerabilities and prevent infestations where you can't get your crop back from. So as a result, if you concentrate on those vulnerabilities, your rescue treatments of chemicals that can harm you and the environment are not needed or not needed as much. So there are 5 parts of IPM. And if you want more information, you can Google IPM for gardeners, and these steps will come up. But basically, if we're talking, let's talk in reference to a vegetable garden. The first thing that we are going to do is choose disease-resistant plant varieties and place them well. So that means proper placement, proper spacing in between your plants. If it is your first or second year of gardening and you've had some problems in the past, choosing the F1 hybrids is probably the best thing to do when you're first learning about vegetable gardening. And so on the plant tag at the nursery or on the seed package, it will have the name of the plant, like broccoli, and then it will have the name of the cultivar, and then it will say F1 next to it. F1 means that it's a first generation hybrid, and that is going to have all of the disease resistance. Now, we would not be able to go back and gather seeds from that broccoli or tomato or pepper or whatever it is if it's a F1 hybrid, because the next generation of those seeds will not produce a plant that has all of the disease resistance that we need. And I usually suggest to first-time gardeners or young gardeners, meaning young as in you have been vegetable gardening less than 4 years or 5 years. I usually suggest that you use the genetically, the F1 hybrids. It's not GMOs. We can't use GMOs in our gardens, just so we can lay that out there. GMOs are not available to home gardeners. So what you would be doing by choosing F1 hybrids is just choosing a plant that has been bred to be better at disease resistance. So I tell gardeners, if you're new to it, use those F1 hybrids for the first few years. Get a handle on what vegetable gardening is really about and what it's like, and your experiences are going to be different every year. Get a couple of years under your belt. Then you can delve into heritage varieties, heirloom varieties, and things like that that have less disease resistance. So if you know a little bit more about gardening, it will help you manage disease resistance in those heirlooms later on. Biologic control is releasing or attracting natural enemies and beneficial organisms. Cultural control is gardening sanitation. So that means weed, mow, and hoe. So get out in the garden and definitely keep those weeds down. If you are going to be a participant at the community garden, and I try to stress this to my members at my community garden, get out there once a week and get those weeds when they're tiny. Get them when they're small, because once they grow a big taproot, in some cases, they're going to be very hard to get out next to your vegetable plants, and that's going to harm your vegetable plants. Destroy pest habitats. Do proper landscape design for the site and crop rotation for vegetables if you can. Some people just don't have enough room to do crop rotation where it's going to be practical, and crop rotation is really going to be more of a necessity and more practical on a larger scale than your average backyard garden. So if you cannot do rotation in your backyard, it's probably going to be okay, because 15 feet from tomatoes in one year to tomatoes in another year isn't going to make the biggest difference. This is mostly like a farming thing. Chemical control. This is introducing insect pheromones and using organic and biologically produced toxins and pesticides. So what this means is plant-based pesticides and herbicides. And the one thing I want you to remember about organic products is that just because they're organic or they're plant-based doesn't mean that you won't be harmed if you misuse them. Whatever chemicals that you're using, ready to use, which is a category of pesticides, or you're using biologic, organic, whatever you're using, you must read the label on the back and follow those directions, because the label on the back of a pesticide, an herbicide, or any other kind of garden chemical or agriculture chemical is the law. And if you put them on wrong and something bad happens, unfortunately, you're liable. So the fifth step to IPM is the most important, and this is monitoring your garden. So I want you to get into a habit of going out in your garden and hand watering as much as you can when you're learning. So as you're learning, if you're a young gardener, you're going to be able to look at your plants as you water. If you do it at different times of the day, you'll be able to see different pests. Inspect your plants as you harvest. Don't just grab those fresh tomatoes. Make sure you're inspecting the whole plant and make sure you don't have late blight. Things like that. You want to make sure that you're watching for nutrient deficiencies in your vegetable plants. You want to look for any kind of holes, any kind of irregular patterns in your leaves, which could be an indicator of a leaf disease. So take walks in the garden at different times of the day. Again, there are going to be insects that are out in the morning, and there's going to be insects in the middle of the day, and there will be insects in the evening. And those insects don't always overlap. So if you're always watering in the morning, which is the preferred time of the day to water, then take a walk out in your garden in the evening later on after the sun goes down and see what other kind of pests are coming out. If you're seeing holes in your plants and you don't really understand why, you can't really figure it out, you haven't seen anything in the morning or during the daytime, then do take a walk in the evening, because maybe you have slugs and you're only going to see the slugs in the evening or overnight. So it's important to vary the times of your walks. Note the color changes again in your foliage and the holes in your leaves. Now, if you're a flower gardener and you are gardening for butterflies and you have planted things that butterfly caterpillars will eat, like milkweed or dill or parsley, the holes in the leaves and the damage to your plants indicates that you have the caterpillar for the butterfly that you have planted that host plant for. And so that's what you want. So it's important to understand the biology of butterflies, and are you attracting for them on purpose, or are you planting that dill because you're going to be making pickles this year? So in that case, you have to protect that dill if you're going to use it for pickles, because a black swallowtail is going to come and lay like 50 eggs on it otherwise, because that's just what they do. Those girls lay a lot of eggs. And then keep an eye on the number of beneficials in your garden. Kind of keep a loose count of how many green lacewings and ladybugs and other predatory insects in the garden, and the signs that they've been there, because that's a sign that they have food, and as long as they have food, they will stay. So the number one complaint with most gardeners when they go and buy ladybugs is the ladybugs don't stay in my yard. They go and they fly away. Well, they will fly away because you don't have the food that they want. And also, releasing 1,500 ladybugs in your garden is overpopulation. And you want to do that because if you have something for them to eat in your garden, a small portion of that population will stay in your garden, but the rest of them will fly away to go find food somewhere else. So, so don't be disappointed if you don't see 1,500 ladybugs after you release them. So with the idea of learning vulnerabilities of pests, I want you to kind of think of your garden as an insectary. An insectary is a garden that we are planting specifically for nurturing insects that will fight off pests. So we're going to plant for the 3 Ps. That's pollinators, predators, and parasites. All are good insects. Out of the hundreds of thousands of insects in the world, only 5% are pests. And in your home vegetable garden, you might only see, 4 different types. They can do a lot of damage, but if you plant really cleverly, I think that you can minimize that damage. Beneficial insects are going to reproduce in the garden if you have provided the ecosystem for them. You have provided the pollen that they need when they don't have the insects to eat, and they have a place to lay their eggs. That is providing a space for them to live out their life cycle. So insectary plants that we're going to go over today are plants that are grown to attract, feed, and to shelter beneficials. Again, to concentrate on their whole life cycle, to provide that whole life cycle. And in return, those beneficial insects are going to control the pests in your garden. So it's important to learn the different stages of life of certain insects, especially your beneficials. So over on the right-hand side, you can see that we have an adult ladybug, and she's really pretty. She's that iconic ladybug color and shape with the black spots. But over on the far left side, that little caterpillar looking thing that looks like a tire that ran over a bag of oranges, that's the larva of a ladybug. And the larva is what you want. They will eat 10 times more aphids than the adult beetle will eat. So we want to attract ladybugs to have their whole life cycle in the garden because we want to see the larva because they eat more pests. And then the structure in the center is the pupa of the ladybug. So that's when the ladybug changes from the larva stage into the adult stage. This is where the insect is inside that little structure. She's totally changing. She is growing wings. Her eyes are changing. Her feet are changing, everything. And she turns into an adult. So keep an eye out for those little black and orange insects. There are many, many different varieties of ladybugs in the world, many different colors. They actually come in almost every color of the rainbow, except for blue. You can look it up online to see which ones you might have in your garden. And their larvae are all slightly different looking, but most of them are going to look like this guy, where it's going to be black with a little bit of orange. Next, we have the hoverfly. Over on the right-hand side is the adult hoverfly. So it looks like a bee, but it has fly wings and it has fly eyes because it's really a fly. It's not a bee. But they do pollinate just as well as bumblebees and honeybees and other native bees. But on the left-hand side is the larva. And the larva is pretty cool. It's translucent. And whatever type of aphid it's eating, whatever color aphid it's eating, whether they be green or orange aphids, the insect, the larva tends to look like that color. So when they're eating oriander aphids on my milkweed here at home, they have a big orange stripe down either side of their body because that's where their gut is. That's pretty cool. That way you know that they're really doing what you want them to do. And again, the larva is the part of the insect life cycle that is going to be eating all of the aphids on your plants. Not the adult. The adult is actually going to do all of the pollinating that you need in your garden. So they're a really cool insect. Green lacewing is another good beneficial. This photo on the right-hand side looks like it's probably a really big insect, but they're really small. They're probably only a little slightly longer than your pinky fingernail. And again, the larvae are what you want. That's that really frightening looking thing with large pincers on the left-hand side. And they're equally as small, but they are voracious aphid eaters. And you can see that this guy has lunch in his pincers in the front of his face right in that photo. So you can attract them. They will lay their eggs, and their eggs are very unique. Green lacewings have figured it out that if the female lays her egg on the end of a white filament on top of a leaf, the egg is up at the top, that whatever predators are walking around on the leaf won't find her egg and eat it. All they will find is this filament, and they just kind of think it's a hair on the leaf, and they leave the egg alone. So it's pretty clever. So you're going to see that out in the garden. You'll see all these little white filaments. They're about 1.5 inches long. They have a little white dot at the top. That's the egg and the stem of the green lacewing egg. The stink bugs, we don't always want stink bugs in the garden, but I think it's important to identify the larva. The larva will eat all different kinds of pests. They sort of look like a ladybug, but not really, because they have dashes, not dots on their bodies. And they go through a couple different sheddings, so they change a little bit throughout their life cycle before they become an adult. So this insect has a life cycle where it does not have a larva and a pupa stage. It just has nymphs. So that should say nymph, not larva. Sorry about that. So nymphs are just mainly just the baby insects, and they are not sexually mature yet until they become an adult. Now there are some stink bugs out there that are native, and there is one that is non-native. So I think it's really important that I point out the one that is non-native, and that is going to be the stink bug that is in the center of this photo. That's the brown marmoted stink bug. I think it's another insect that has popped in here from Asia, I believe. You can see that it has a black and white pattern that looks like teeth on the side of their back of their body, and they have a white band on their antenna, and they don't have a pointed shoulder. So those are 3 ways that you can tell this guy away from our other brown stink bugs that are natives. Mostly because the 2 native ones, the spined and the brown stink bug, do have those edged shoulders. They have like almost like a little spine there, and the brown marmoted don't. So if you see brown marmoted stink bugs in your garden, they're also larger than our stink bugs that are native. It's probably important for you to toss them into a bucket of soapy water and just get rid of them. Don't let them lay eggs. Parasitic wasps. Parasitic wasps are really cool insects in that we don't even really see them, and there are thousands of species of them, and they do the bulk of the pesticide work in most gardens. Whenever you see a tomato hornworm, if you've seen a tomato hornworm in the garden, I should have put a picture in here of that. If you see a tomato hornworm, which is a large green caterpillar, it's going to be on your tomato plants. If you see that and that insect has a whole bunch of little white dots on the back, which are raised dots, they're actually an egg casing. Those are the eggs of a parasitic wasp that has laid her eggs on that caterpillar, and the caterpillar is actually being eaten from the inside out, which in the pesticide world is pretty cool. So if you see that tomato hornworm with the little white dots on its back, don't bother it, because it's going to die. It's not going to turn into the moth and become sexually active. But the parasitic wasps are going to pop out of that and go off and find more tomato hornworms to kill. So that's a good thing. So the photos on this slide are from the parasitic wasp that attacks the oleander aphid, which is an aphid that plagues milkweed plants. It's really hard to grow milkweed in this area without having aphids, but eventually the parasitic wasp shows up, and you know you have them because of the inset picture on the top right. These are where the parasitic wasp pupated and popped out as an adult. So those are called aphid mummies. It's just the brown hard husk of the aphid after it's been completely eaten from the inside out, from the little wasp, from the larva, and then the larva pupated and popped out. So if you see those on the backs of your milkweed plants where you have had aphids, it's amazing how fast they can clean up an aphid problem if you're also helping just by rinsing off your plants and rinsing those aphids off your plants. So let's talk about plants that attract beneficial insects. There's plants that attract beneficials, and then there's plants that repel pests. So we're going to talk about both groups today. For insects, hunting for other insects consumes a lot of energy. And so we want to have a certain percentage of high pollen plants in the garden that are going to feed the beneficials when their main food source is not available. And those are generally flowers in small clusters with abundant pollen. I'm going to show you a few of those in a sec. And then the beneficial insects will stay in your garden longer instead of moving on, because if they have that high quality pollen source to eat, pollen is almost pure protein and amino acids. If they have that to eat, then they will wait it out, and they will wait for that pest insect to show up because they have some food. And tiny insects need tiny flowers, and the parasitic wasps are tiny, so they need tiny flowers. So this is why alyssum is so beneficial in a vegetable garden, because they have those tiny little flowers, they have abundant pollen in those flowers, and they are able to stick around a little bit longer and wait out for the aphids. because alyssum blooms before aphids. So we have yarrow. This is generally our native yarrow, which is a big pest in some people's lawns. People hate having it in their lawn. But if you can have one plant in your garden and deadhead it so it doesn't make seeds when it's done flowering, that would be a beneficial plant for you. Same with Queen Anne's lace. Let Queen Anne's lace, let a few of them grow every year. Let one go to seed. Don't let all of the flower heads go to seed, but have some Queen Anne's lace, whether it be in the alley or, on the back part of your property behind a shed or something. It's a really beneficial plant to have nearby. Fennel is also great too. I grow bronze fennel in my garden because it is one of the host plants for black swallowtail butterflies. And then the flowers bloom and they're teeny tiny little flowers, and they're usually covered with tiny little bees and other little tiny pollinators. So these are just four. These are probably four of the best beneficial insect plants. Some other ones that are, a couple of them are native for later in the summer, and that would be New England aster and goldenrod. So if you're going to put New England aster and goldenrod in your yard, be very picky about which goldenrod you're going to put in. You don't want to put in tall goldenrod or Canadian goldenrod. It should be something like showy goldenrod or Riddle's goldenrod. Those are two really good varieties that don't spread outrageously fast, because goldenrod does have a bad rap for that. And mostly it's the Canadian goldenrod that does that. That's what we see on the sides of the roads all over Lake County in the fall. New England aster can also grow into a really big colony, and it can reseed a little bit, but it is by no means a pest. You're better off with having more New England aster than none. So put those two plants on your list to buy at the native plant sales this year. Parsley is another great plant for beneficial insects because you get the flowers in the second year, but if you plant a little bit of parsley every year, you're always going to have flowers the second year, if you plant a little bit every year. Lemon gem marigold is one of the older species of marigolds. And the reason why marigolds are planted in vegetable gardens are because people believe that the chemicals in the plant actually repel a very damaging nematode in the soil. Okay, granted, that's what people believe. There is some indication scientifically that that is true, but you have to plant the right goldenrod. You can't just plant any kind of goldenrod. If you plant the goldenrod that is just, the hybrids from the garden center that are the new hybrids, they don't have as much of that chemical in their roots as the older varieties do. And lemon gem is one of those really old varieties. And the flowers are beautiful. The plant grows into a little mound. It's a profuse amount of flowers, and they're all about the size of a dime. And the pollinators absolutely love this plant. So if you're going to go for marigolds, check out this one this year and see if you like it. I love it. It's one of my favorites. So fighting off insect pests naturally, there's a lot of other options other than chemicals. We can do things like companion planting. You can just plant in your garden plants that repel unwanted pests. Make your garden friendly to wildlife. This is one of my American toads. This is a picture that I took probably 6 or 7 years ago in my garden. And I just popped that toad in that pot so that I could take a picture. But I was weeding in my garden first thing in the spring, and usually that's how the toads get woken up in my garden. But last night, my husband and I were sitting on our patio, and all of a sudden we heard this really weird, like squeaky peepee noise, like a chick peeping, and couldn't figure out what it was. We never could find out what it was, but after it did it a few times, I realized that it was one of the American toads. And we have a vernal pond in our park right down the street from our house. And last night we had the window open, and we could hear all the American toads out in the vernal pond calling for mates. And so it was pretty cool that I had never heard any of my toads make a sound ever in the 20 years that I've had my garden, or 25 years that I've had my garden. And so it was kind of fun. That's a fun thing. That's the cool thing about inviting wildlife into your garden. So one thing that you need to remember, if you're going to invite toads or bring toads into your garden, you can't have snakes. So if you have garter snakes, you can't have toads because the snakes will eat the toads. They're not quite fast enough to get away from the snakes. And then you want to make sure that you respect spiders a lot in your garden. Respect them for the fact that they eat tons of insects. And it's not always fun to have those orb spiders or crab spiders or banana spiders making giant webs in the fall. But during the spring and summer, I really value the fact that we have jumping spiders in our garden. And we had one yesterday hunting a wasp, and that was kind of fun to watch. So it's important that you not only want to repel the pests, but it's important that you respect the beneficials, even if they're beneficials that you don't really expect are beneficial or that you've traditionally thought were beneficial. So here are some plants that repel insects. Do you see one thing in common in all these plants? They are all in the onion family, every single one of them. So the plants in the allium family are good for a lot of different things. First of all, they're really beautiful. I don't really like the smell of onion plants, but I have tons of allium in my garden because I know that they fight off pests that I don't want. So we have chives up in the right-hand corner. Those are tasty. You can even eat the flowers. So when your chives are blooming this spring, which should be very, very soon, you can cut the flowers off and saute them with vegetables. If you're going to have something, it'll give a little onion flavor to your vegetables. In the center, we have a landscape ornamental onion that is a summer blooming onion. So this one is probably summer beauty because it's pink. And so there are a lot of different of these ornamental landscape alliums that are coming out on the market. They're short. They're only about 8 inches tall. They do not spread like chives. They are a different species than chives. So you don't have to worry about them spreading outrageously. You know, over 5 or 7 years, they're going to make a really nice colony, and then they can be split and spread around the garden wherever you want them. Allium giganteum is on the top left-hand side. This is the large globe-shaped alliums that come up in the spring. And this is what I mostly have in my garden. And the interesting thing about it is I originally planted the allium wherever I planted a clump of tulips. So instead of planting one tulip at a time, I'm planting a whole clump of tulips with an allium bulb in the center of the hole. So I'm putting these guys all in the center of one big hole that's about 10 inches wide. About 6 or 8 tulips and one allium. But now I have alliums literally all over the place. I need to start potting them up and giving them away because I have allowed them to go to seed for so many years because I like the dried seed head that now I just have hundreds of them all over my yard. So it's getting a little bit crowded. So hopefully this year I'll be able to clean some out. But they're not a pest. This is like, I planted my first alliums 20 years ago. So this is naturalization that has happened over 2 decades. They are by no means a pest. They are a little bit pricey. And if you can buy just a few of them in the fall, I think that you will really find them very beautiful. And they are a really good food source for early bees and early butterflies. Down below that is garlic. If you've never grown your own garlic, try it this year. It's great. I did it last year, and our garlic is really, really good. If you're going to choose to do that, make sure you are growing hardneck garlic in the garden. For us in the northern climates, like where we are right here, we need to have hardneck. And then in the center is a native allium. There's several actually, and this is the one I'm most familiar with. This is nodding wild onion, and it blooms later on in the summer. And then we have Egyptian walking onion on the bottom right. And that's kind of, it isn't edible. You can break off those little purple onions in the spring and you can eat them just like spring onions or scallions in the spring, early summer, or you can leave them on. And the reason why it's called walking onion is because these bulblets are on the top of a 2-foot tall stem, and they get really dry and heavy later on in the summer, and they fall down and they start a whole new cluster of plants. So they walk around your garden because they do this tipsy thing where they fall over. They are edible, but most of the time people are growing them just as sort of a novelty plant. That's why I've always ever grown them. They're kind of a novelty, and I think they're really pretty. But these are all plants that are going to repel insects that we don't want. And hopefully, oh, I don't have the list of insects. I think the list of insects are going to be things like thrips and aphids, borers and weevils, things like that, things that are really going to be a big pest to your garden. So if it's appropriate, you know, growing garlic right next to your zucchini might be good, but you have to look that up on a companion planting chart and see if they're actually compatible. Sometimes if you plant certain vegetables with other vegetables, they don't like each other. You don't want to plant things like hot peppers and sweet peppers together because your sweet peppers might be hot at the end of the summer. So you want to look that up. So some other plants that are really good at repelling insects, and this the most popular thing that these guys are going to repel are aphids. So there's nasturtium and basil, and over on the far right is purple basil. There are literally hundreds of varieties of basil. There is the sweet basil that is in the center photo, and then there are basils that taste like cinnamon. There's Thai basil, which is really spicy. There's lemon and lime basil, which really both do taste like lemon and limes. It's really cool. And they're all very tasty for different kinds of recipes. So basil's great to have around just for cooking, but it's also really good to have around because it repels insects. Now, I grow basil on my deck, and when I go out to work in the garden, if I know I'm going to be out there for a while and if the mosquitoes have been out, then I'll break off a branch and I'll stick it in the back pocket of my pants because it really does a good job of repelling mosquitoes. And that's mostly why I'm growing basil, is because I can, you know, help keep the mosquitoes off my deck. Now, this is not the type of thing where you're ever going to take basil leaf and rub it on your skin. You will never do that, because if you go out into the sun after you have done that, you will get a chemical burn on your skin. It is enough that you take the basil branch and crush it up a little bit and stick it in a pocket, and that will help with the mosquitoes. You never ever want to just rub leaves on your skin unless they're very specific for a certain specific herbal remedy. Borage down in the bottom is another herb that we grow in the garden that's not super popular, but it really should be because it attracts bees so well to the garden, and bumblebees especially, and they're really beneficial. The flowers taste like cucumber. You can make a tea out of them, I believe, but it's not a very popular thing that we eat here in the US as far as herbs go. And nasturtium also, the entire plant of the nasturtium plant is edible. It tastes very peppery. The flowers and the leaves can be added to salad early in the season. You probably wouldn't want to do it in August or September, but early in the season, those young leaves are really good. And then cilantro down in the bottom is another good one that repels insects. And one that I'm going to try and grow this year, my seeds didn't come up, but I'm going to buy some plants, is chervil. Chervil is supposed to be a really great remedy for aphids. And I'm going to get some chervil, and I think I'm going to plant it around the base of some of my milkweed in my flower garden and see if it can't help with those oleander aphids. So it's going to be an experiment this year, trying some things out. The research is out there. Now we just have to test it, right? So as far as slugs go, slugs can be a problem if you have moist conditions in your garden where there's places for them to hide. They like cool, moist areas. If we have a very, very wet summer or a very wet spring that's cool, we're going to have a bad slug season. And so this year we've had a dry spring, and so there's not going to be as many slugs as there normally would be. The bad thing about slugs is that if a slug can't find a mate, it just mates with itself, for lack of a better term. It can produce sexual organs for both male and female, and they can produce their own fertilized eggs. So slugs can be a big problem. So reduce their hiding places. They like rocks and overturned pieces of wood and logs and things like that. You can go out and hand pick them in the evening. You can use beer traps, which is what this is here. This is my garden. One year we were having a really wet spring and I had a terrible problem with slugs. And I just did one beer trap and I renewed the beer and threw out the slugs. I think, every day for a couple of weeks, maybe a week. Maybe it wasn't 2 weeks, but at least a week. And it really helped control the numbers because it got rid of them. So the yeast in the beer attracts the slugs to the beer, and then they crawl in and they drown. So a fitting death for a nasty pest. You can also use diatomaceous earth in your garden, but it shouldn't be diatomaceous earth that you use for your pool. It has to be horticultural diatomaceous earth. Those two things are not, they're not interchangeable. Japanese beetles can be a big problem in our area. I haven't had very many in the past few years. It seems like the population moves around year to year. But the most important thing I can tell you to do is the first time you see a Japanese beetle in your yard this year, go outside with a bucket of soapy water and hand pick all of those first ones. Go out when it's really cool in the morning and they haven't warmed up and they can't fly, and knock them into that bucket of soapy water. These guys are the scouts. They have come out from your lawn or your neighbor's lawn or wherever they're coming from, and they will start chewing on things in your garden, and they leave behind a hormone when they eat, and that hormone attracts the rest of the beetles in the area. So if you get rid of a significant number of those first scouts in the first week, then you shouldn't have as big of a problem as you have had in the past. It really does help a lot. You can use a garlic tonic on your plants. There is no pesticide that you can put on your plants that is going to be very safe, that is going to kill Japanese beetles. You can't go out there and spray your plants and expect to kill them. You don't want to use systemics on your plants because that poisons the nectar for hummingbirds and other bees. The best thing to do is just to hand pick them and try to avoid growing what they like, which is hard because they like a lot of different things. Garlic tonic really does kind of keep them away, though. They hate garlic. So you can make a garlic tonic with, there's a horticultural company out there who is selling garlic, I believe, in a concentrate, and you mix it with water and a little bit of soap and you spray it on your plants. And that just keeps them off that plant. That does not kill them. There's very few things that we can go out there and do that with. Earwig traps. Earwigs can be a really big problem for some gardeners. I tend to have a big problem with them. I think I might have the one that's non-native because my earwigs are giant. So sometimes I use earwig traps. You can look up the directions for earwig trap online, and it gets them to go in there at night and they die because they can't get back out of that trap. They can't figure out how to climb back out. So it's kind of like wasps. This is the same kind of thing that you can put bait in for wasps and get rid of wasps. Earwigs are sugar eaters. They like to eat flower petals. And when my purple coneflower when the flowers are all mature and they look really beautiful, that's when the earwigs come out and eat the petals. So if there's something in your garden that's eating just flower petals, most likely it's an earwig. And if you go out at night, you'll be able to see them. Okay, fungus in the garden. The only way to keep fungus from really doing a lot of damage is to prevent it. So you can make homemade fungicides. You want to rotate those formulas and to keep immunity from forming. And this is the one place where you can safely use a chemical fungicide safely. It's probably, I don't want to say the most safe pesticide that's out there. It's not as damaging to the environment as other chemicals. That's about as far as I can say that, because all chemicals have an effect. They all have an impact. But if you do things like water your plants from below, and you do that early in the day, then you're going to have less of a problem with fungi. I don't want to give you any homemade fungicide recipes because they're not scientifically proven. I'm not going to say that they're old wives' tales because some of them do work well, but you're going to have to look up your own recipes. Okay, fertilizing organically. This is really a lot easier than you think. And this is probably the one thing that I tell everybody at my community garden where we're growing vegetables. I have 41 beds out there that grow vegetables strictly for the 4 pantry gardens, or the 4 food pantries that feed the surrounding area of the town that I work in. And last year we provided 2,400 pounds of food out of 41 beds, which is a really big achievement. And the way I do that is because we grow in compost. It's our soil is basically in our raised beds is 100% compost, and we add to it every year. And then we fertilize every 10 to 14 days in the garden with an organic fertilizer. We use Fox Farm liquid fertilizer for vegetables, and it's a good brand. I know as a master gardener, I'm not supposed to suggest brands, but I think for organic fertilizers, there are a lot of good ones on the market. So you can ignore this list and you can still find a good one. But these are like the most widely available. But my gardeners at the community garden, the ones who are renting beds from me, they always complain, why are your vegetables looking better? Why do you have more tomatoes on your plants? Why do your tomatoes produce earlier than mine? Why are you getting this, size zucchini and things like that? And I always ask them, are you fertilizing your bed? And they say, well, no. And I say, well, that's the difference. So fertilizing in a vegetable garden can be beneficial, even if you are growing in compost. Because compost is a soil conditioner, it is not fertilizer. It does not have the nitrogen, the potassium, and the phosphorus that plants need. And those are the three most important minerals, elements that you have to put into a plant for fertilizing. And P and K, sorry, lost my train of thought. But again, compost is a soil conditioner, as we learned earlier today, that it's going to add in microbes into the soil that are live, and they're going to be able to do their life cycle and do all those beneficial things for plants that they would do out in nature, or that they were doing in the compost pile. So think of it like that. So the bottom line is that gardening, everybody says gardening should be fun. Gardening should be fun. Gardening should be really fun. But gardening should also be earth friendly, and it should be healthy for you. Gardening organically is going to save you money. Fostering an ecosystem is much healthier for you than trying to put out fires with chemicals. So try not to do that with your garden. Try and do some of those preventative tactics. Get out there and watch your garden during the summer. Go out there and sit and watch things. Garden sanitation is key, and garden sanitation is easy if you do it often. Keep your garden clean. You don't have to keep your garden 100% clean, because the soil organisms do need some organic matter to decompose, to make nutrients, and to feed themselves and to benefit the soil. And have fun discovering your insect friends in your garden. When I started collecting monarch eggs and raising monarchs in the garden, that is when I really noticed that I had a lot of different insects in my garden that I had never seen before. And it was incredible to start watching them, to start photographing them, and see what they're doing, see how they're behaving, making sure that they are reproducing. So it really was an eye-opening thing. I learned a lot about insects in my own garden just by paying attention. So that's my suggestion to you. Do you have any questions?
Lynn would like to know what your opinion is on preen.
I think preen is a good product. I use preen at work, in my landscaping at work. And we use it in our flower beds every year to try and reduce the amount of work that our volunteers who adopt those flower beds have to put in. So I think it's okay. But the thing to understand is that if you preen every single year, twice a year, like they want you to, eventually you're going to have weed seeds that are going to mutate, and they are going to be resistant to it, and they will grow through it. So it's important to alternate chemicals or take a break for a few years. But other than that, I think it's a good product.
Lindsay would like to know how to prevent squash beetles.
I think squash bugs and squash borers can be prevented by planting certain herbs like nasturtium and chervil, and I think sage might be one of them. But I think that if you concentrate on putting some herbs in with your squash, that should help. And last year I planted my squash at the community garden after June 1st. I think it was maybe the first weekend of June last year. And I'll tell you what, planting it late helped so much. I had much fewer squash bugs. I had much fewer squash borers. So keep that in mind. I still got a huge amount of vegetables out of those plants, even though they went in a little late.
Could you suggest a few flowers for attracting pollinators?
Yes, definitely zinnias. If you have room, plant Mexican sunflower, plant regular sunflowers. Purple comb-flower is great for summer. And herbs, and let some of your herbs, let them go to flower. So if you want to grow basil for pesto and you're going to put in a dozen plants because you need a lot to make pesto, let one of those plants go to flower, and that will help. So let some of your herbs go to flower, because once your herbs go to flower, that plant is going to have very bitter herbs on them. But you should let at least one of them or two of them go to flower. If you want more suggestions on flowers that attract pollinators, go on the IUN Cure YouTube page, and my butterfly gardening lecture is up there. And there's a lot of information about pollinator attracting in that lecture.
Thank you so much, Dolly.
Have a great day, everybody.